Hi. How are
I
you doing?
love your photo. You look
Oh,
great too, but your photo is fun. I'm like, oh, hi.
oh yeah. You have to have a nice entry into this, right? Yeah. My business partner and I, when we have fun, we experiment with different backgrounds, and
Mhm.
we use some of our old photos. It's kind of funny. The other day, I almost hopped on a meeting with him as Thor in my background. Maybe not, but given the best impression of our firm, but I thought it was quite funny.
It was just the two of you, because then it's just fine, right?
Yeah, totally, right? It's not a big deal, right? We're real lawyers, Don't play them on television or on podcasts.
That's awesome. Oh, I love it. Well, you know what? That is why we want to work with you, because you're the real lawyer.
Well, try to give a different impression on what it can be like working with us. That's what we
Gosh.
try to do. I don't know.
Girl, I have been in interviews for attorneys for our litigation court case Thursday, Friday, and most of Monday. I was talking with only attorneys all day. Like it was back to back to back. And I'm like, they are so different. It's
Oh,
so interesting to just see. I mean, as in any industry, I'm sure, but for some reason, I think there's so much of a stereotype for that industry. And so it's like,
yeah.
wow, night
You
and
know,
day.
and they try to live the stereotype, I think. It's like
Yeah.
there's the and I never had this course in law school, unfortunately, or fortunately, but I feel like there's this course of this is how you conduct yourself if you want people to think you're a real lawyer. You know, generally only use big words and talk down at people constantly. And if you have to, pull your nose down so you look like you're condescending, even when your words say it without you staring at them in a weird way. I don't know. It's just so bizarre.
You're so right. It's so interesting.
So
Oh
different.
my gosh. It's so refreshing to talk to you. Let's just say that.
Well, I like to keep it real. I always talk about how I've always wanted to be a lawyer. I mean, since I was 5 years old, this is just my jam. I love it.
Cool.
But I was in Boston. I did litigation before I went into estate planning, and it's so aggressive. And it was kind of a double layered thing of me kind of getting to where I'm at, and it's thinking about, well, one, just because I'm generally type A, and maybe an aggressive person, or determined, not aggressive, I'm determined.
Yeah.
And just because I have those elements didn't mean I needed to exploit those elements.
Right.
Right. And I found myself becoming a very aggressive, I mean, more aggressive than I was comfortable being. And just very upset constantly because you're always
Mm.
cleaning up other people's messes and not being able to solve anyone's problems. I mean, you're not in a defense litigation standpoint, you're not solving people's problems. You're really just trying to make the best out of a really terrible circumstance. And your client is never whole,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
And I think in that circle of going around and around, I just was getting very unhappy. And being a farm girl, I didn't know when to cut it off,
Yeah.
because I didn't grow up on a 9 to 5 schedule
Mhm.
with my parents. They didn't have a job they went to and then they
Mhm.
left and then they got to leave their job. It was like the
Yeah.
job is their life. It's all around them. And so I don't know how to naturally have a cutoff from my day job. And so that's where, going into planning, I just made a determination that I'm going to do this because I want to do this. And it's either I do it my way and I'm able to be my 100% authentic self, or I'm not doing it at all. And, I guess clients like it.
Yeah. That's a testament to the direction that you're going. So high five to you. And high five for having the self-awareness to recognize when you were going down a path you didn't like, because most people don't realize that until they're at the end of their career.
Well, it just maybe it's because I'm stubborn. I
Also good.
reimagining my circumstances to my liking. Because
Mhm.
if you don't feel comfortable, then adjust the circumstances. I
Mhm.
feel like when I'm working with clients, because I do estate planning and that's my main thing, I I just put myself in their shoes and just, how could you divulge all these very personal aspects and talk about death and your incapacity? And I tell clients, I'm like, I'm going to do some pretty bad things to you today. I'm going to not only are we going to talk about your death, I'm going to kill you off. And then I'm going to tell you your kids are horrible individuals and we have to do something about that. But I'm going to walk through all these circumstances and we're going to try to problem solve and, to be that individual and to talk about those sensitive items. I mean, if you're not transparent on the other side, if you're not authentic, if you're not genuine, how could you even expect that person on the other side of the table to give you an ounce of truth?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, so good. Girl, so I am so excited that I met you.
Me too. Well, I think, have the same kind of qualities about yourself. So, right.
Well, I appreciate the levity you bring to such a hard topic.
Well,
You
yeah.
gotta.
Well, you have to, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I've had quotes from, this is when I know that I was doing 100% the right thing. And I don't know, this is probably 2 years in my business partner, Peter Osman, and I creating this firm. And this is an actual swear to God quote. My client said, estate planning is so fun, it will make you want to die.
Oh boy.
I was like, oh God. And I remember Peter talking about one time, one of his clients, and I remember this because I was trying to work and they were so loud. I'm like, it's estate planning. You don't have to yell, but they were talking and they're like, oh man, I really like how this is working out. And they're talking about kids and how when they died, their money would be distributed to them and what purposes and the reasons and kind of, the guidance that is drafted in a document for the trustee. And I'm like, oh, this is so good. I really like to see how this works out. And it's like, the wife said, you have to die to see how this works out. It's like, oh, I know, but man, this would just be so awesome for our kids. And it's like, okay, well, I don't, maybe we elevate it a little bit for our clients, but if you walk through that and you can visualize how well taken care of your kids are, I think it does give peace of mind. It makes you feel good about what you're doing because it shouldn't all just be sadness and, these dire circumstances. It's supposed to be this way of being jazzed up that if you weren't there, you feel like your kids are getting taken care of. I think that's a big deal. So,
Yeah. I can totally relate because I think when I first started drafting my like daydream of how I wanted things to play out for our kids, I was like, yep, okay, I want them to go to this family reunion every year. I want them to attend these things, I want them to have swimming lessons or whatever it was. I felt really strongly about that. So to have that say, it feels good. So I get that.
yeah, and it's, I have a lot of clients who sometimes they don't do planning, and I find this out through talking to them, and maybe it's an older generation, but they're like, I don't want to burden anybody. And sometimes
Mm.
I think that's even when people are selecting guardians, they hesitate to get the documents done because it's this thought process of, oh man, I don't want to burden these people by naming them in the documents. And what they realize is the burden is not naming someone in the documents. And yeah, there's task involved. Yes, people that are serving agent capacity and guardians, there's extra stuff that you're adding to their plate, obviously. But the burden is when you've not done anything. When you have no one named, because then you're putting this burden on the family to do what you probably could have done better yourself during your life. And that's the true burden, to be in a position where your family feels like they're disappointing you, where they're trying to, I don't know, post-mortem, read your mind about what you would have wanted. And that's the burden. The burden is not knowing. The burden is putting into a terrible position because you don't know what someone wished and really wanted. And so that's, kind of correcting that idea in someone's mind and giving clients that power that they have to get things done. I think that's what's cool about estate planning. You empower people to make their decisions. They don't have to be 100% correct. They don't have to be, it's always the 80-20 rule, right? I tell you what, 80% of the time, it's going to be the best case scenario. And that 20%, we're not even going to talk about it. Who cares? You do it, you do the best, and your kids are going to be well taken care of, and no one's going to have to decide for you. It's a big deal.
And what a gift that you can give to all the people that you love most.
Right. And, and we're recording right now, right? For the I
We
just
are. Yeah. We haven't
I
gotten
kind
started
of like
yet, but you're
logged
all
on.
good.
You're just so easy. I logged on. I was like, oh, there's April. Let's just talk about me and you and how
And
awesome
estate
you both
planning.
are. I like a state. Okay, so just yeah, I just wanted to know if I had to like stop and pause and let you do your
Nope.
thing there.
You're all good. Yep. You know what? I've become quite the little sound editor, so you're safe.
Okay, good. Okay, so then I don't know if you wanted to kind of lead into some specific questions or just want to hear me ramble about how
Yeah, but I wanted to see where you were going with that first.
well, I was thinking
Yes.
about, in selection of guardians. I think that's probably your audience right now. They're thinking, they're tuning in, they're wanting to figure out, okay, so what is estate planning all about and where I'm going to start. And usually if they're a younger group of people that have these young kids, anybody under the age of 18, that's the first thing. And I think that's where I gravitate towards when I'm talking to young people first, because I remember being there. And it's actually a short time ago. I'm 40 years old. I have two kids, they're 5 and 8. And I think I told you the story, but I didn't have an estate plan until my son was 10 months old. I was doing estate planning well before that, which to me is just the craziest, most hypocritical thing ever, is that I'm preaching to people, I'm walking them through and how they should do estate planning and it's the right thing to do, where myself, I hadn't done anything and I had a 10-month-old kid. And really what led me to doing it was I had a presentation to give. And I told you I want to be authentic. I want to be my
Yep.
authentic, genuine self. And I kept thinking, because this is a group of people. There's a lawyer too that was going to be attending. He's a business law lawyer that I like, and I think I given your name.
Yeah.
Who I'm talking
Yep.
about. And I just thought, you know what? He's going to ask me if I've done it myself. And I know this group, they're just going to do that. That's going to be the first question out of their mouth. And so I ended up making the presentation about my estate plan. So my husband and I actually went through the process and we started thinking about it. And what I discovered through doing that is I knew exactly why I hadn't done it. And that's because of the guardian.
Mm-hmm.
Like we had such a hard time. And as a transplant that didn't grow up in Wisconsin, that's one element, right? I don't have family just all around me to put into different positions. I live in Wisconsin, and the fact, maybe I wouldn't want family, to serve in that role, because you're thinking about the different stages of their life. But I felt isolated. I felt alone, right? Because that's hard when you're
Yeah.
thinking of guardians, and sometimes you don't have the perfect candidates.
You're
You're
talking my language.
yeah, and you just feel so alone that you just didn't you're like, wow. And I have all this evidence of other clients that work with me, and I'm like, oh my God, I wish I had I wish I had all those options. Like, look at all these like 8 people you could choose from to raise your kids. And like, how cool is that? But there's always other issues, right? But to me, gardening was hard. And then when I started the process, I started doing the own planning. What I figured out was that me keeping it in myself, me keeping those worries and those concerns in my mind made it where I was giving myself more fear and more more roadblocks than I deserved. Really, I deserve to actually vocalize my concerns and walk through the pros and cons of different people. And what my husband and we ended up naming a family member, and I think I told you who, but you know, it was thinking about what's the worst that can happen. And I know the worst that can happen. Not naming someone is probably the worst thing that can happen, because then you throw all these different people into the scenario where they're thinking they're either the best choice or they're trying to back solve or postmortem mind read us. And that's not fair to them, because I put them in a position of being people that they're not going to like. And I don't want to do that. Right. And then I think about, what do I want my kids' environment to be like? And, we're pretty straight laced individuals. My husband and I are working a lot. We, very, I don't know, determined and probably harsh on the kids a little bit. But we thought about, if we're not here, and I can remove the money investment aspects of it. So I can remove all those things from the guardian list, right? Because a guardian's not your everything. A guardian is a backup parent. And so we took away all the other aspects about estate planning, assets and investments. We took that away and just thought about the human beings. And we thought, what we want? Our kids to have a good life. We want good humans. that are going to welcome these kids, that are going to love them unconditionally and give them just a little, I don't know, a little bit of levity. Right. And so we chose people that are not like us whatsoever. And I'm so jazzed up about it. I was so happy. I felt complete. I was like, oh my God, we just made this decision. I thought we were alone and isolated, and we made it a good decision. I'm so happy that we did it because I didn't have to think about it anymore. And it
Yeah.
was, is walking through thinking about where the kids are going to be, like the happiness that we can give them. And then we turn the page to, okay, now how the assets get invested, how do they get managed? Because when I talk to clients, they're like, oh God, we have to pick this person to take our kids. Oh, but how are they going to accommodate them in the house? And oh, what about all the investments and the insurance? Who's going to manage the whole estate? I can't imagine putting that on one person. And it's like, oh no, let's divide and separate. Let's find the best people for the best roles and then define the team for them. Give them the rules and the guidelines so they know how to play the game. And they know when they go outside the rules and they know how to do a good job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's because when we talk about guidelines of, how money gets used for a kid, and your goals and your aspirations of, you want to fund their education, but maybe you want them to pay a little bit for the education. Maybe it's a match, whatever these family values that are going into this money management, that's the fun part. That's the dreaming part. That's the part where you could list these guidelines and give the trustee instructions so they know they're doing a good job. It's putting it out there. And I think that's how I see estate planning. See a way of making it a happy part where you can dream a little. Sometimes people dream a little too much, and maybe their kids don't pan out to be the one that's going all the way to PhD. But it's still fun, right? It's still just guidelines. It's still just aspirations for, the kids to look back on. Maybe when you're adults, everyone lived. You all lived, and your kids are 40 years old, and they're looking at these documents, and they get to see, hey, you guys really care about us. This is a lot of work you put in these documents, and we can see it. That's a pretty cool thing to show someone.
And it's done from the lens of love, which is so
Totally.
cool.
Totally.
It's
Yeah.
neat. It's almost like, I keep joking. I'm like, you guys, I want to do an estate planning workshop because it's like a love language for me. If I could do that, and if I can gift that to my kids in the event that something crappy happens,
Totally.
I mean, I don't think you can show your family you love them anymore.
That is so true. Like, yeah, my love language is action too. Yeah, it's like
Mine isn't, ironically.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's not, which is so funny. But estate planning in particular, this is the one where I'm like, okay, now that I can focus and I'm in a good spot, we're doing this.
Yeah. And I don't think, I hear a lot from clients that it's not as hard as people make it out to be either.
No.
It goes back to what I said before about when my own personal struggles of picking a guardian and how in my own head, I made it so hard, because I don't know why I made it so hard. My mind took advantage of the situation and took me down a road that was sad and lonely.
Mm-hmm.
But once I got into it and once I said, okay, I'm going to commit to planning, I'm going to commit to having this conversation. It took no time to have that conversation with my husband. We've been dancing around it. We had it. I think it took us probably 30 minutes to make the decision. I mean, that all that weighing and the consideration and saying like, okay, well, if we eliminate this, that, and the other thing, and this is what we're looking at, we want someone who's going to love our kids and be happy and kind of be a little quirky because we're not, then boom, it was easy. We eliminated it and we made ourselves stop being that roadblock. And then when we move on and we start doing the other matters, it's, I know how to lead the conversation with my husband, obviously, but I find with other clients, it's leading that conversation and kind of getting a sense of who they are and some of their biggest concerns, and then going through the process of thinking about what their concerns are, in a very general sense. I think if people sat down and they took the law out of it, if you take the law out of estate planning, if you take what people think estate planning is out of the equation too, right? If you say people listening to this podcast, if they're having trouble getting there to actually do it,
Mm-hmm.
stop wondering what you're supposed to do or what it's supposed to be like or what everything. Stop it. Just think about, all right, the basic elements we need to think about are who's going to be the backup parents for our kids. Those are simple terms or non-legal terms. That's what it is. That's guardian. No, that's who's going to serve the guardian. Who's the backup people? And then who's going to make sure that our money is being used for everything we want it to be used for our kids, the ways that we would use our money for our kids and the way we would raise our kids and, help, financially pad their life throughout these different life stages. One, who is going to do that for us? And then now that you know the people and the places, right? Who's going to be managing the money, who's going to be, serve as backup parent. Sometimes when it's not different, when it's different people, then let's think about how are they going to talk to one another? How do we envision that? Walk through the visualization of, okay, this person's located here and there in this person's house. So how do we want to help them talk? Right. And then if people walk through those it's not simple, but the conversation side of planning, I think it becomes a lot easier to handle because everyone can visualize, everyone can talk in plain terms about, well, when I think about my ideal situation and how my kids are growing and how I would want to provide for them during my life, how I would want to, help them go to undergraduate school or help them, have a down payment for a house. I mean, people know those things, and it's fun to think about how you would want to do that. And then it's the lawyer's job to be the scrivener for that. It's okay, because we can't predict those things. We can't read your mind, right? I can't read April's mind and say, okay. And I don't think she lets anyone read her mind. I think she puts it all out there. So like the best client ever. But but as someone who's thought about, like, let's paint the picture. Let's I'm going to write out my soap opera of what I want my kids, to go through, who how I want my guardians to talk to my people that are managing money. And what things do you know about the people you've put in place that might cause some communication gaps, right? We're just people. And documents should reflect the people that we're putting in place.
Shayna, I hadn't ever thought about this until you were talking about this just now. But I think if you take the time to actually plan it out and, like you said, dream a little, it almost creates a roadmap for you to parent your own children.
No, that's what I want to be.
Like if you think about it, like that's almost like okay, I want to make sure I do these things. I want to make sure I'm hitting these milestones and these benchmarks. And it's almost like a checks and balance because the guide is there, whether you're on the bus or not.
And what's so cool about it is, when kids are young, babies and toddlers and 5 years and 11 years old and all that stuff, you're doing what you can to teach them financial things, right? Like, here's a penny, or, you're trying to do things. But when kids get to that, no, maybe there's some kids that are interested in this and maybe you force them to, but when they're about 14, I find parents have an opportunity to talk to them about guardians and things like that. And when I have clients that have 14-year-olds and older, they actually ask those kids, what they prefer. They bring them into the conversation, and it's kind of cool. But there's also another side of this.
Wow.
So, when you're dreaming and you're putting these goals of how you want to raise your kids, that discussion becomes these expectations that you could say, all right, kids, this is what we expect. We expect you to go to undergrad. And in fact, we want to make sure that happens even when we're not here. And people are like, oh, that's a pretty aggressive conversation for a 14-year-old. You know what? They're going to take in what they can at that age, right? You're not going to say it's all, It's, you're not going to talk about the fiery crash that leads to the trust, coming into place or the will existing. No, it's talking about expectations of things like, we expect you to go to college. And, we'd love to be able, you to buy a home. And, when you're at this age, we think that you should be able to manage things. People that talk about estate planning at an earlier age, you see these kids, it being a part of their family's DNA in these talks and this communication. I mean, that's really the difference of when I see families that have really done it well. I'm always looking for the secret sauce. My clients are my subjects. It's like, I need to learn everything I can about raising good kids and being a good parent and good human. I have failed at every aspect of it. I know no matter how many good people come in front of me, I have failed, but I don't care. I love just listening to like the secret of life, right? The secret of good living. And you hear these families and it's about that communication early and often, not forcing kids, but, seeing what their interests are, having this dialogue. And the more it gets talked about, then it's not this scary subject for anyone. It's this is what we do as a family. We talk about this and we know where estate planning is. And what happens? The kids are more open when they're talking about these things. And it becomes an inherited trait is this is what my parents did for me. This is what I'm going to do. This is what we do as a family. We do, we put our will in place the moment we have kids or, the moment we're doing these, we have prenuptial agreements and we provide this way. It's just another value that you could pass on to your family. And it's really cool. I love seeing how I get to work with multiple generations and it does translate on. It's the coolest thing ever.
That's pretty neat. I'd never thought of that, but that's really just changing the generation's legacy.
Totally.
Because, for example, my parents didn't talk about this with me. And I think, an anomaly in my family. Like, I'm the strange one that wants to talk about it with all my siblings and my parents all the time. And yet, had they talked about it, it wouldn't be such a strange and uncomfortable conversation. It would just be a fact of life.
Totally. And it wouldn't be fearful. You feel like you're
Cool.
like inventing the wheel right now, right? When you're
Totally.
going through this, you're inventing the wheel and it's overwhelming, but your kids are going to be like, yeah, so we've heard these words a million times. I guess we got to do this now. Better think. And it's not going to be scary. It's not going to be this huge thing that are like, oh God, we got to figure out how we have to contact a lawyer, what our assets should be like, all this, that, and the other thing. No way. There could be like, yeah, this is what happens. This is what we do. It's night
Yeah.
and day difference of when I've seen people go, well, when people have these planning stories where their parents did this, now they're doing this. Oh gosh, it's cool, right? It's like, they're planning from a place of security, of knowledge, of this is what is responsible and right. And we want to be as good as our parents were for our kids because we know how beneficial that was, right? And
Wow.
and they just have these natural things of, well, I remember my parents going through this when they're this age, so we figured it's about time we did this. Whereas you have the other side of the coin where maybe there was a negative situation where they're planning because they have a story that didn't go right. We're like, well, we never expected it, to be such a disaster when dad died because they were married, but nothing was coordinated. We had to, dig under this couch and, all these different things about mom didn't know what to do and all the process and administration. And they're planning from a perspective not for our kids. We don't want that negativity. And when you come at something with negativity, I mean, there's a lot more distrust, right? You have to kind of re-empower people to, because when I think the hardest things to plan for in people's minds are the easiest for me, right? Because
Sure.
when I talk to people, and sometimes, especially second marriage situations or when there's kids of not of the marital relationship, you know, the obstacles if something happened to them without documents in place, you know what? I gotta tell you, they're not good. It there's no need to obsess over it, it's just not good, and I end up working with clients and go through and I say, what do you want to do for each other? Like, how do you want to plan? I start from a feeling of, what do you want to do? Who cares what the law is? Right. I don't want to confine people into knowing the outcome. And I don't want to fear them into choosing to do planning. I want them to be empowered to say, this is what we're going to do. Right. And we like this. Because once they sign their documents, I'm like, I'm glad you did that. Because it would have been crazy, if you did it, because every once in a while, like, what would have happened? I'm like, you don't want to know. You won't be able to sleep if I tell you
Right.
exactly what would have happened if you didn't go through the planning. And I think that's a better way of doing it. It's like, get a goal and say, I want this. Like, I think, I want my kids to have good, strong work ethic. And I don't want any money from life insurance, because we're all heavily life insurance up. I mean, I think so. I think everyone should have a lot of life insurance. It's kind of the salary replacement for if something happened to one of us. It's a pretty big deal. And I think a lot of young couples, they don't realize how much money they're really sitting on for their kids.
Mm. How much life insurance do you recommend?
Well,
Do you?
I'm not a financial advisor, and I'm not a life insurance person. And
We'll
I do,
do those interviews with them.
they're
Actually, I did them.
yeah, they're well qualified to answer those questions. But, in their defense, right, I feel that when someone is selling life insurance, people turn off, right? Because it's like, oh, you're going to get a commission. I can't trust you. And, you know, they're doing their job. They're doing their job the best they can. And life insurance is extremely important. And it's thinking, I always think life insurance, and I hope no one hates me for saying this as a life insurance agent, but in my mind, it's a goal of where you want to be in retirement, right? So if you're putting, because really it's a replacement for, you know, how you were, if you're a marital couple and you're saving money and you wanted to do, send your kids to school or do this, that, and the other thing, that life insurance is a oh crap policy. It's, oh crap, one of us passed away. We don't have that income anymore. But just because we lost one of us doesn't mean these goals of when we're going to retire, how we want to send our kids to school, what we want to be able to provide, when we want to pay off our mortgage, doesn't mean those things stopped. Right. And so that insurance is insurance on your goals and dreams of how you wanted to live a nice, good life together and raise your kids the way you wanted to. I think, unfortunately, some people think about like, oh, I'm going to put a big old target on my back,
Oh,
or,
geez.
it's like, well, I don't want my spouse to get that much money when I die. But it's like, think about this, when there's two people, it's not double the cost for two people. When you're married, if one person passed away, it doesn't mean like half of your expenses are just gone. That is not true. You still have the same number of kids you had before the death, right? You still have the same number of college opportunities. You still have the same mortgage in the house that you bought as a family to house your kids. You're using the same room, hopefully. And so the elimination of one spouse does not really cut into the financial obligations that you both committed to when you entered into a marriage and when you agreed to have kids, right? And so when I think of insurance policy, I'm thinking of, this is, that person is, they're gone in spirit, they're gone in body, but they're at least providing the salary that we made our dreams and our goals on. Right. And so
It's a good guideline.
yeah, and that's why you're playing, it's kind of a gauge of retirement, because if you do a basic, kind of a universal policy or a term policy, the expiration date of when it starts getting higher is really right around your retirement. Sometimes, if you're 40, you got a 20-year policy. Well, then when you're 60, you're going to know really what your retirement's pacing like, whether you have 5 years, 10 years, or whatever it is. And so it's like, oh, well, I expect to have, $2 million, or what, it's 10 years of salary that you're trying to do, or 20 years of salary, and an estimation of like, when we retire, this is how much we want to have in the bank. Right. And I think it's using some of those elements to make a numbers-based assessment on something that may seem a little out there. I think when you're trying to make a decision, at least that's how my husband sees it. He sees that he's going to guarantee 80% of his salary.
That works.
That's how we're pacing it.
Shayna, for anyone listening to this you've given so much insight already, but if you were talking to somebody who has done nothing,
Mhm.
what would you say is just the first step? A gentle nudge or dip the toe in, because there's probably a reason, like you said, that people haven't taken the action yet. So what would that recommendation be or advice be?
You know, it's one is think about, your biggest fear. One, why haven't you done it, right? Or I don't know, some people, if they're listening to this podcast, and you know what, either they're doing it because you're going to ask them questions later, they still want to be your friend, or they have general interest into how to get started. And if you ask them what's the biggest thing that they're scared of, you know, that I think if people actually pinpoint what they're nervous about the most, sometimes that motivates people, right? On the other hand, it's if they're concerned about having everything perfect and everything together, don't even. I mean, oh, well, that's our job. I mean, that's a lawyer's job, right? Why have to, I can't stand it when people feel like they have to invent the will, right? If I can help them, or anybody, any lawyer can say, this is how we can do it. This is the process. This is how you proceed. And they can give them advice about how they're supposed to get ready for it. A process, there's so much, we've done a lot of research in this, and we've built our firm around processes. Even when a pilot is piloting a plane, right? There is a process, there's a checklist they go through. They're not doing it from memory, right? They're looking at this checklist like, okay, check, got that, check, 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 because that's what the industry has put in place, and what all these people have put in place to say, you know what, if we're going to get off this ground and we're going to have a good flight, this is the checklist we need to go through. And not every individual family doesn't need to go through and create these checklists. It's like, okay, where can you call? How can you get guided to make the checklist? I think that's one thought. If people are thinking they have to, we want to get off the pot, we want to do planning, don't be your own enemy. Don't be the biggest thing holding you back because you think you have to be perfect and you think you have to have everything together. Let someone guide you and tell you what you need, and tell you what the process is, so you know what to worry about and you know what not to worry about.
Yeah, that's a good piece of advice.
I mean, I guess, maybe I'm talking more for myself. I think that if I was not an estate planning lawyer, because it was very hard for me. I mean, God, my kid was 10 months. That means I waited 100 years to do an estate plan. Literally, that's what it is in like estate planner years. If you wait that long, it's 100 years. Uh, but, if I think about myself, it's like, you know what? I just didn't follow my own process. I didn't rely on a checklist. I just didn't sit down and say, I'm going to commit, and this is my time frame. I got a deadline. I put a deadline on myself. That was the number one thing I needed. That's a me thing. I need a deadline because time is infinite and it goes by too fast. Right? If I don't have a deadline, if I don't have a date, I'm not doing it. Right? And so I set a date. It was the date of my presentation.
Good date.
That was my date. And then I filled out my own forms. I have a questionnaire. I went through it with my husband. I completed my own questionnaire, because I wanted him to think about this, right? I wanted him to go through and look at this and to know how easy it is, to know the things that actually are important, right? To have, and it's not a big, our questionnaire is not very difficult, but that simple checklist of just going through, and then, to think about the people that you would name. Just that thought process is enough. It's just the general thought of thinking about who would we name as guardians, even if you don't write anything down. But who would we name? Say it out loud to each other, to you and your spouse. Say, who would we think about a guardian? Who do you think would manage these assets for us if we passed away, for our kids? Saying it out loud, not worrying about naming person, but having one single conversation with your spouse about it that takes 30 minutes over a glass of wine, I promise you, is the first step. It's
That seems pretty easy.
yeah, you would think that. But, if you could poll people right now of how many times anybody ever talked about it.
Or
How
avoided it.
you avoid it like the plague. But I mean, if you
Uh-huh.
schedule something with your partner, with your spouse, and say, you know what, we are having this conversation. This is unwaivable. We are scheduling this 30-minute conversation to at least say to each other what we feel, who could be good backup parents for our kids. You already started the step because you already started thinking about it, right? And you said it out loud. And then the next step is just you know, and you don't have to be perfect on this, but to have a conversation, maybe it's one spouse or the next, but assign a job, of who manages the assets of the family, right? Who manages the assets? And maybe you just take a list. You write a list down of what kind of accounts you have, what kind of institutions. They don't have to be perfect. They don't have to have the actual amounts, but if people just go through and say, hey, by the way, this is like an inventory of all that we have. Because it's hard to think about how to plan when you don't know what you have to plan with. And,
Mm-hmm.
we make our clients go through that. We have our questionnaire. And it's so fun when I hear from them because they're like, whoa, we didn't realize we had all this stuff going on. Right? Because people don't. You're earning. You're just managing to wake up, not forget a kid somewhere, and to maybe gaze at your husband or wife or spouse, partner at least once. Maybe. That's all last on the list, but I'm kidding. Oh,
Don't tell Tony that.
right, you're just trying not to kill one another, kill a kid,
Yeah.
just try to do it and get the lunch made,
Get the laundry done. Yes.
and you're earning and living and income, and these assets that you're accruing are untouchable. They really are untouchable, right? When you go through and you're earning income, you're earning things so you don't have to touch them during your life. You're living off your income, right? And so you forget that you're just adding to this list of complexities over time, right? And if you just have a nice list, that's estate planning, because you know what you're doing. You have an estate and you're planning because you're writing it down, you're making a list. And you know what? If people just go through that, if people that don't, maybe they manage their assets separately too, this is a huge list because both people are going to do it. Just think of the benefit you would give each other just to know where everything's at and what's going on, right? That's a huge thing.
What a
That
gift.
I mean, right? And then the next step is, all right, well, talk to people, talk to friends, talk to family about what they did. I think sometimes these conversations are pretty important, you know, um, depending on who the person is and their personality. Do they make decisions based? It's like take one of those quizzes online. How do you make decisions? Do you make decisions based on stories from other people, other friends? Do you make decisions based on a recommendation from someone else that you trust? Is it research that you need to do to get those, but I say those all different ways because that's how we, end up finding clients, right? It's how were they referred to us? Was it a friend, colleague, financial advisor, a friend? But you start learning things about how people make decisions. Is it talking to a trusted neighbor, or is it talking to a financial advisor, or is it going online and researching? But they have to know when they found a really good person that they have trusted to do a service, how did they find that person, right? And that's what they should do. They should find their person and get comfortable with that, and don't fear, I guess, if they're not happy, don't stay with the person, right? I mean, April, you know that, right?
I'm
If you're
nodding my head.
if you
Yes.
if you don't feel connection, if you don't feel heard, if you don't feel listened to, and if it's a personality clash, maybe it's the wrong day, give another chance. But if it's not, then find a new person, because your plan is going to reflect the conversations that you're able to have with the person.
And
And
Shayna, I can say, as somebody who has vetted out a lot of people in the area, I felt that connection with you where I hadn't felt that with other people. The first person that did our estate plan, was wonderful, and I didn't have anything to connect it to or compare it to, and it was good for that time. But then as my kids started getting older and I had more kids and all of a sudden we had different things going on, I'm like, holy cow, we need somebody who's a lot more thorough and somebody who's going to get to know us at a deeper level and walk down that journey with us. And I'm so glad that we found each other because you're absolutely right. You got to find somebody who you feel confident with.
Yeah, and communication is a big deal. There's so I always think my business partner Peter Osman and I, and he's wonderful too. Uh, we always have this thing like, man, we work so hard to get business, and we try so hard, and then have this client every once in a while that comes there, and the wife will say, I never liked him, and I'm like, how? It's like I can't believe what people, maybe we lawyers have done just a terrible job of being people, that when they have clients, the clients truly think, well, this is the best I'm going to get because all lawyers suck. I think maybe, I don't know why people sacrifice a good relationship.
Well, as somebody who I just mentioned earlier oh, did I lose you?
Oh no, I just got this
Oh,
notification. I'm like, oh crap, did we go over?
we did. Yes. Are you late? Do you need to go?
I'm like, hold on.
I didn't
And
even look at the clock. I'm so sorry.
oh my God, no, in 14 minutes, that's all.
Oh, okay, perfect. I'll wrap it up. But I will say, as somebody who I just mentioned is in the market for a representation on something completely different, for the longest time, I just went with the person that we had because I thought that was how it works because I'd never done it before. And
Right.
so, as somebody who is learning more and engaging more with people who are quote unquote attorneys, it's just like any other industry. You have to find a good fit and you have to almost shop around until you find that level of trust and that open communication that fits what you're needing. And I didn't realize that because I just assumed that everybody was the same and had the same caliber of expertise and would do everything the same way. And now I'm learning that that's not the case.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's just, every person's different. Every person needs to find that person that's going to communicate well with them. And I would caution people against the online road or things because, you're not getting counsel. It's not documents that people get. I think it's hard for a client to compare different legal documents and understand which is better. I know I love a good drafting. If I draft a good provision, I'm just like, oh, I'm really jazzed up. I'm like, woohoo, it's like a personal success for me. And thank God I like those things because no one else appreciates some of the provisions I draft because they're pretty cool, but that's okay. So I know it's not a document comparison, but it's a counsel.
Mm-hmm.
I know when Peter and I were in these meetings and someone says, I didn't think about that. Oh my gosh, that's such a compliment, right? Because of course, that's what our job is. If every meeting we have with a client was, okay, well, looks like we didn't need you. Then that, it's the counseling, it's walking through this. It's talking about the people that are going to be in actually asking hard questions to the client. I guess we're not pharmacists. We're not just going to fill a prescription. And I think I said this phrase to you before. It's like we're really in the more of a doctor capacity of going through this. We're going to diagnose. We're going to look at a family. We're going to look at what they think's going on, what they think should happen, maybe some of the things they've researched. And we're going to take that all in and say, okay, well, we think that this is how we should go about this. And this is the problem solving and the counseling that attorneys provide. And I think that's the biggest thing about going through a process with any lawyer. It's that counsel, it's that advice, it's that wisdom, that we can say, are you sure you want to do that? It's like,
Asking the hard questions.
and the coordination, because it's not just the documents. People have put a lot of documents in place, but if they're not giving life to those documents, and if they're not connecting those documents to the assets and making sure it's comes full circle, I think they're missing out on really what the whole estate planning, process is. It's making sure you have the right documents that fit the situation, that name the right people and you know how they're going to work, but then making sure that what you're putting in that document actually is what's going to happen. And every asset is different in how it needs to be connected and, coordinated to make sure the estate plan is across the board exactly what they talked about. And I think
That's
that's,
really interesting.
yeah, and that's a big part. And I've seen even when people have done planning before, when I'm talking to them and, it's like, okay, well, look, it's always the initial onion was peeled. And then it's like, okay, great. You know some of these terms, and we're going to really take a deep dive now because you've gone through this before. And let's take it a little bit further, why, did you talk about assets with the last lawyer? Did you do that part? Did you make that connection? Well, let's make it now. And it's that additional learning, that additional education, and it creates something where I know we have the smartest clients out there, and a smart client about their estate plan, comes through building a relationship, having these hard conversations, and then knowing that an estate plan is an estate planned. It's not you put these documents in place, you put them in a drawer, and you never think or talk about them again. Not true. It's planning is a present participle. The ing means something. It's review, it's think about, it's having a top of mind awareness that, when you're buying assets, you're making financial decisions, the estate plan is talking with those assets and those financial decisions too.
So good.
Yeah.
Shayna, you gave a lot of good insight and a lot of wisdom. And as somebody who can endorse you because you are the person that we've chosen to work with, for anybody who's making those decisions based on a referral, how can people get a hold of you if they've loved what you've said and they're like, yes, that person is who I need to connect with?
Well, thank you. It wasn't all about trying to get business, but I love talking about this stuff. So I appreciate you making a
Hey,
shout out there.
that's good karma. I gotta teach people who haven't taken those steps. I want to say that yes, I've done my homework. I've vetted people out. You're the person that I've chosen because it's a good fit and I really believe in what you're teaching me. And now I want to make sure that anybody who hears this and is like, "Oh, well, I trust April." How can they get a hold of you?
Well, what I would say is, we have two great attorneys here that love what we do, and that's Peter Osman and myself. We have our bios on our website. And I know it's kind of hard to say out loud what our website is because both our last names, especially when combined together, are super weird, but it's Borakove Osman. And maybe they can contact you to get that address, but it's Bees
We'll
and
put that
Boys.
in the show
Yeah.
notes.
Oh, you could do it. Good job. Okay.
Yeah.
So if they go to our website, they can look at our bios. I think that's a really good start because I think there's personal aspects that we've put in there that talk about us, and they can choose and they can do that, contact us through our website and make sure they get the official process. They can always contact us individually too, but you're not hiring just the lawyer, you're hiring our entire firm. And each one of us here is going to give you the best part of the experience that we each know how to do. And while the attorney is always doing the drafting and leading the client through there, we have a wonderful staff we want everyone to know that everyone's available no matter what's going on, and they're going to guide them through the process and answer some of those questions that maybe they just want to get out of the way even before they meet with us. We find out that our staff is doing that a lot. They're like walking people through. It's really cool. And we end up finding out when we talk to the client, like, yeah, this person, Allison was great. Erica's great. We just feel like, we're getting so much love and care from you. And I think that's a good way to contact us. Go to our website, read our bios. If there's someone that connects with you, personally, like Peter or myself, or if you just want to roll the dice, and I think we're both pretty awesome, then that's a good way to go about it.
That's so helpful. Thank you again for your time today and for sharing all of your great insight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, April. Have an awesome day.
Thanks, you too. All right, my dear, I'm gonna wish you well, and we'll connect, I think maybe next week or the following. Okay.
Cool. Can't wait. All right. Bye.
Awesome. Thanks. See ya.